Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel, and today I am joined by Harvey Gratian from the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. He's one of my sort of favourite Arsenal analysts on YouTube, so please be sure to check his channel out in the description below. But we're here today to cover the North London derby, Arsenal against Tottenham Hotspur, and I'm going to be sort of the Spurs representative on this to try and balance it out a little bit, and I'm going to try my hardest, Spurs fans, to give you sort of confidence going into the game and why you should have a little bit of confidence potentially. So yeah, straight away, I want to say I'm ridiculously ill, so I'm sorry. We're going to do our best to cut around the sort of sniffles and stuff, but I'm really sorry if it gets through. But we're going to speak today about the North London derby, and Harvey's going to have a go on the board in a minute to just show you what Arsenal are doing that has made them so impressive this season. Potential weak spots from the Sunderland hangover, going into the international break, Gabriel injury, what that makes up of the back three. But before we do any of that, I want to stress how good Arsenal are against the big six teams, and I think a lot of people have known this for a long time now, but since the start of the 22-23 season in the Premier League, Arsenal have got 65 points against the big six, which is 11 more than second place Manchester City. They have only lost one of the last 16 games at home in them seasons against the big six team. This is a very, very, very good team against the big teams, and we're going to try our hardest to give Spurs a good representation in this, but can you explain to me what Arsenal have done this season which makes them even more impressive? And we'll go on again to speak about the backline manoeuvres and who's going to play where.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, thanks for the introduction. Really kind words. The two things that Arsenal have changed this season, or the two terms I always come back to, is calculating risk and a kind of refreshed sense of urgency in this team. Because we talk about how good Arsenal were against the big six, the clusters of results that have come to harrow us in seasons gone by have been your Newcastles, your Fulhams, your Evertons, your West Hams. A Thomas Frank Spurs presents a proposition that's much more closely aligned with those than typical end-to-end
Manchester United.
I mean, the Old Trafford game is going to be a kind of marker for how Arsenal have developed this season, because that Old Trafford game, we almost treated the ball like a bit of a hot potato at times. Yeah. But for me, I talk about calculating risk. I think risk has always been a word that's come back to bite Arsenal or Arteta in the past. Arteta's been risk averse, or we need to take the handbrake off. I won't get into it. For me, it's more nuanced than that. But certainly, there are zones and there are areas where we have had to take more risk. For me, it's to do with picking our moments this season, when to go and going with full bite into our actions. And I think Zubimendi and Riccardo Calafiori have been key in kind of toggling that risk for us on and off this season. I think if we just start more broadly, there's been clearly an uptick in tempo from this Arsenal side. I mean, one of the patterns of play we see, more often than not is if we move this mid-block onto, I spoke about, I'm going to speak about baiting mid-blocks, baiting the jumps out of them. Not necessarily a full-blown man-to-man press that we will expect in phases from Frank Spurs. One of the passages of play that we've seen a lot this season is waiting for a team to jump onto us. The right centre-back, often Saliba, sometimes Mosquera, playing that ball into, sometimes it's Eze, it's been Ødegaard, it's been Nwaneri. First time, followed, back to goal, plays a bounce pass into Zubimendi. And I call Zubimendi the best details player in the league. That's what he is for me. Zubimendi playing around in these cover shadows, giving Arsenal a kind of organisation on the ball that we haven't had, but an organisation on the ball without actually touching the ball.
Yeah,
and it
feels like a conductor.
Exactly, it feels cliche to say, but it really is. You watch Zubimendi and you see a lot more of what Arsenal are trying to do. It gets bounced first time to Zubimendi, and himself can play it 1-2 touch. He's going to release a winger, and we're arriving into the final third with more momentum, not hitting that buffer of a low block. There's also Zubimendi, I'll get on to more too. He's actually one of, loads of people, you see a Spanish number 6, you have ideas of a sitter, a controlling midfielder. He's been one of our wackiest players this season, Zubimendi. Partly all of this comes with, a centre forward, bringing Gyökeres, someone who, is coming from a lot of criticism, but one thing, he's streamlined, I think, the game model at times and clarified certain areas, needing to be more direct in moving the ball forward. And I think as a team, because of that, one of the big things when I say calculating risk is actually a team that's more able to tolerate losing the ball this season. I've said it so much on my channel. ball losses, especially for a team like Arsenal with the athletes that we have in rest defence, how we swarm on the counter press, ball losses can be so productive.
Yeah. It's like Klopp said, pressing's the best playmaker, or something like that.
Absolutely. And if you can tolerate a few more losses, whether that's risking a pass or risking a dribble, then suddenly you have a settled picture of a block against you. They suddenly get an idea that they want to jump and they want to start moving forward, and gaps start to open up that weren't there before. There's been the debate, Calafiori, Miles Lewis-Skelly at the left-back. It just depends what Arteta is asking the left-back to do. With Miles Lewis-Skelly, let's say this becomes Declan Rice suddenly sort of pinning a bit higher. Lewis-Skelly on the ball like this.
Plays much more in midfield, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Calafiori plays a lot here, doesn't he?
And I'll get on, he's sort of a weird and wonderful thing, Calafiori. He's sort of a troublemaking Italian, as I like to call him. But if you get Miles Lewis-Skelly receiving back to goal like this, he sits and he wants to be dynamic on reception, where he can shrug off, turn and start sort of scything through a press. Calafiori, his dynamism comes off ball. I mean, if you just watch the sheer quantity of off ball movements that Calafiori makes, if we get this tilt with Rice and Zubimendi, it's not always like this, but let's say it's Rice spilling into the back line, splitting, Zubimendi inside the block, sort of trying to accelerate play if we can access him. Calafiori is the one sort of hunting for little gaps and advantages around this pairing. And I say pairing, not pivot, because it's so fluid what Rice and Zubimendi are doing. One can join the final third. And Calafiori, he can spill wide, interact like this, or he can make those sort of barreling underlaps. And him and Trossard have developed a really good relationship where Trossard will sort of hinge lower and whip one first time over to Calafiori through this half space. I mean, Arteta calls Calafiori a kind of disruptor of organisation, and I think that's a really good way to frame it. And that kind of framing is mentally how Arsenal have approached this season more, a more urgent side.
Yeah, no, perfectly explained. I want to just piggyback off what you just said there about Calafiori. Now, I was watching this sort of Spurs, I think like a fan forum, where Thomas Frank was actually asked about some of his key tactical bits, and he said sometimes they want to go to more of like a zonal block. So what do I mean by this to the audience? So we can imagine that this is sort of Spurs in a 4-4-2. Now, one thing that I noticed, I actually wrote an article on this called Back Five Chain, and it was about how teams were, when teams want to play a forward five, like Arsenal often do, they end up in this situation. Now, for most teams who defend in a 4-4-2, it is really hard to sort of manage the 5 players on the last line if you're defending in a back 4. So what I was noticing was a lot of managers were picking up different ways to get 5 defenders across the last line. Oftentimes in a 4-4-2, Emery does it a lot with his wide players. Frank drops one of the ball side midfielders. So let's say the ball's with Zubimendi or Rice and he's over here. Calafiori, if he makes that run, and we've got two centre backs maybe looking after Marino, and we've got like a Trossard holding him, then one of the ball-sided midfielders, I'm guessing on this side it'll be Paulinho, he will drop in to sort of cover that half-space area so we can get 5 across the last line. Now, for me, that is where, as you just said, Calafiori becomes an integral part of this team and an integral part to the game plan for Arsenal, because, as we know, Spurs, under Thomas Frank, and even when he was at Brentford, were a very good team at punching upwards and battling against the top teams. We all remember the games at the Etihad when they beat City there, and so on, so on. And I think Thomas Frank already, in his time as Tottenham manager, has proven that some of the bigger games he works best in. The PSG game, the Manchester City game. I'll go on to speak about why they're key references for this game. But for me, I just look at a stubborn block. They're going to be hard to play against. I don't think there'll be much jumping out. I think it's going to be very, very key for Calafiori to get them, as you said, they're destructing runs, arriving in there. Obviously, the gravitas towards a player like Mikel Marino might not be as strong as it is to a Gyökeres, but aerially, this is a very good player, so he will have to get looked after by big players. But another question around Arsenal in terms of the last few days and what's happened. Obviously, Gabriel's now out for 1 to 2 months. David Ornstein has reported, so he will not be in this game whatsoever. There is numerous injuries for Arsenal. Looking at Kai Havertz, Gabriel Jesus, Madueke, Martin Odegaard, players like this. How do you see Arsenal adapting to the players they have, not having Gabriel, and how big of a loss do you think it is? And will Ricardo Calafiori actually potentially move away from left back?
I mean, it is a crushing blow. It's why we've built the kind of almost 8-player octagon that we have at the back. Calafiori could play there, Hincapié could play there. It looks most likely it will be Christian Mosquera, who's partnered Saliba before. I mean, personally for me, Mosquera's been our left centre-back. Saliba's been on the right. For me, I'd actually flip that because I think Mosquera, I mean, he's almost like two different players. You see him sort of charging back towards his own goal, these legs sort of flying everywhere and sort of eating space. But on the ball, he's actually got really light little steps and he's really cute, but he loses some of that, I think, when he's further left, and he loses that incision that he has to access between the lines, whereas I think Saliba, can do it on either side. The argument is, and the only real reason I can think of at the moment, Arteta obviously he loves continuity, but I think, if Saliba moves to left centre-back, that also changes how, what does the left-back do? Because you want Saliba in the middle more often than not. So then does the left centre-back or left back, would normally be Calafiori. Does that have to become Rice? Does Calafiori have to sit into a 3? Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of at the moment. The real exciting things that I can see long-term is, they could be either way around here. You could have a Hincapié left back or a Calafiori left back versus a Calafiori Hincapié left centre back. Could be Mars Lewis Skelly as a left back as well. But the rotations and interchanges between a Calafiori, a Lewis Skelly, or a Hincapié, you'd see Lewis Skelly sitting and being in the zones that he loves. Calafiori going roaming, certainly in the final third more and more when he has a bit of license to do that from left centre back. Hincapié would be more of your pusher from here.
He's more of a last line guy and he more plays
exactly. But exactly the same is that he is, where he's been in a back 3 for Leverkusen, playing left centre back. Allow Calafiori, if he starts as a centre-back, certainly in the final third, to go on his adventures, go on his travels.
I thought he had a massive role against Liverpool when you went to Anfield, and it was a similar dynamic because you had Calafiori roaming in behind a higher positioned Salah off the ball, and I thought he had a very similar role where if the superstar player, which it always seems to be in Kudus, Salah, in Mbeumo, if it's Manchester United, it always feels like that player's more drawn towards the other half. So these runs off the shoulder from Calafiori are exactly where I think the joy might be for Arsenal in this game if we're talking about disrupting a Spurs block that's really stubborn to get through. If you were going to wrap up this segment just by picking your Arsenal 11 for the game, would you be happy to do that?
Yeah, I say yes because part of me thinks it kind of picks itself. Because it's going to be a Trossard, Marino, Saka front 3, and it's probably going to be that for the next couple of games. And we were talking before, and I said how if it feels weird being a side top of the league, joint top of the Champions League table, and being more drained coming out of an international break than leaving it.
Yeah, you've lost in the international break.
So although we got a lot of attacking players nearing return for the next couple of matches, next couple of weeks, is a big shift for them. I think it picks itself there. I think Calafiori and Timber will be the fullbacks. Again, that picks itself. And I think Arteta is going to go Mosquera, left centre-back.
I think that's the best way to go personally.
I probably agree. I think the only thing you can think of is just the conviction that we have in our press with that vocal leader that Gabriel is. Suddenly, if Rice jumps onto Bentancur in our press, Mosquera, who's a super aggressive centre-back, but from these angles, is he going to have the clarity of mind to make the decision whether to jump and match up or sit back and keep for the Spurs' second balls that they love to win deeper? Again, does that have cascading effects on a Calafiori who has improved so much his timing and angles, picking the duels, picking the right battles from left back? Is that going to have domino effects on him against Kudus? And I'd say one more thing to expect from Arsenal, maybe if you haven't watched us as much this season, another thing that we're doing differently against these blocks is I spoke about it's not being a necessary swerve in Arteta's philosophy, the kind of changing Arsenal side this season. But when the time is right, it might start with sort of your typical occupying all your lanes like this. But this season, when we decide to accelerate play, that might be Trossard in behind for Calafiori. That might be Saka making a burst inside, Timber ghosting on the outside. Is Johnson going to follow him? That's another one with Saka pinning most likely Spence. We decide when we accelerate play to collapse it 2 on goal. That's why Calafiori and Eze are getting so many shots. And you'll see in Arsenal who, picking their moments, are actually a very central thrusted side.
Yeah, very, very collapsing on the box almost.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We're going to now move on into the FM26 segment, and then after it we will come back to speak about Tottenham Hotspur. Thank you. Okay, now to wrap up the Arsenal segment, we have our sponsored segment by Football Manager 26, and of course Harvey's with me in the studio today. And I want to talk specifically about 2 players, one for Arsenal, one for Spurs, and I want to highlight Declan Rice. And for me this season, and probably last season as well, he's staking a very big claim for being, in my opinion, the best midfielder in the Premier League.
Glad you said that.
I think, honestly, he's gone on leaps and bounds from, I think even from West Ham, but also his first season at Arsenal. I think when you get tired with this, I think the best thing I can say about Declan Rice is no one ever mentions how much money he costs. And I feel like you've got to justify your money in performances. And if no one ever goes, oh yeah, but you expect that of a 100 million. Right. Yeah, you're doing something right. And I think he's one of the few players I've seen in the last few years, well, one of the only players in the last few years who have gone for that money, who have never really been spoken about on a main, narrative of the actual money that cost them. But I think this season, and a bit towards the end of last season, we've seen an evolution in what Declan Rice has actually been able to do at Arsenal. I've got his FM attributes rankings among the central midfielders in FM26, and he's first for tackling and first for decisions. He's also third for first touch and teamwork. Now, in your opinion, what has Arteta done this season with Arsenal, and maybe Martin Zubimendi included into that, which makes him sort of perfect for this newer Arsenal side?
I think the word you use there, evolution, is critical. And it's the one Arteta used himself when he was describing, he disagreed with Rice himself, how he was changing his role this season. He disagreed in saying it was a change and more of an evolution. He mentioned Rice becoming a total player. You hear the words or the term total football a lot, and I think it's become almost more of an aesthetic about what a total footballer is, or to play total football, to kind of slicken attacking rotations. But it's also about, okay, can you play a switch to the far corner and then set the press and be the guy leading the press as well? And what I've liked about Declan Rice is because he's got the deeper qualities to ping a switch to Saka down here, or to wait for gaps to open up, and he's developing a whip ball through the lines like this. But what I want to talk about is the global license that he's developing on the pitch, because he's still got the ability to be last season's self, to pick his moments to arrive higher in the box, and that's crucial. But also he's developed being able to switch with Zubimendi, the ability to influence games on the right-hand side. And I think he's kept a lot of these attacking elements to his game holstered for so long. They're talking a different variety of cross, different angles for shooting, underlaps in the final third, bringing a different kind of dynamism, and being this global player for Arsenal, taking the mantle, taking the responsibility. What we've been able to do this season is, instead of funneling the ball into the final third, to just hold the ball in the middle third a little longer, to wait for a jump, to bait a jump. Zubimendi inside the block being a kind of accelerator pedal for us, which I really like. Rice, as an example, being the one outside to wait for the jumps and then play a pass through. And the key thing for Arsenal is that we can begin to arrive then in the final third, not hitting a brick wall that could be a low block, but actually we have a bit more of that ability to hold the ball in the middle of the pitch and arrive with advantages and momentum in the final third. So that's the big thing. That's one element of what he's got with Zubimendi this season. But I just love the total influence that he has in the box as well, timing his arrivals, and just becoming that total player that Arteta stressed about.
I'm going to kickstart the Spurs section of the Football Manager piece by talking about Mohammed Kudus. Now, I've got his sort of key attributes from the FM26 database, and we can see that he's actually got 17 dribbling, 16 technique, 16 agility, 15 acceleration. And for me, he's actually tied first for dribbles completed in the Premier League this season with Jeremy Doku, which is a serious sort of Hall of Fame dribblers token to have with him. And I think Mohammed Kudus is looking like, at the moment, he's cooled down a little bit for Spurs, obviously picked up a knock, but he looked like, at the time, one of the pound-for-pound best money signings in the summer window. I think when I've looked at him and I go, what does Spurs need for a Frank team? I think he's probably one of the best examples of what a Thomas Frank sort of wants in a right winger. If I if I just put it up into, and we'll go and speak about this again when we're talking about Spurs more generically in the piece, but this ball is very, very popular for Spurs, and he's one of the only players. I think Odebear's actually got a little bit about him in terms of the swivelly hips when he can take the ball back to goal. But I think a player, when pressure's on the back, there's not many who are better than Kudus. To my mind, I can only think of a Brian Mbeumo or a Bukayo Saka who can take back to goal pressure and do pretty much anything on the ball here, which is come inside with the ball, attack sort of in these swift motions, lobbed crosses to the back post, but can also square his man up and take them both sides down the full-back. And people forget there's a lot of scrutiny about this signing coming off of sort of a down year of West Ham. People were saying that he sort of packed it in at West Ham. And he come to Spurs and it felt like sort of a rejuvenated player. And yeah, he just seems to have come in and been perfect for what Frank wants.
I think when we'll talk later about kind of the stresses that Spurs have in build-up at times. I know you've spoken about it on the channel before, but how important Kudus is, and without him, we're not having that release valve to relieve the tension. I mean, you spoke about comparisons to Saka and Mbeumo, Salah, players who like the contact up sort of their back and can actually just roll it so easily. And I think there's also the importance of Sarr in this to make those selfless runs, to create this space for Kudus to move into. Sarr becomes another really important foil to try to... It's the same kind of role as Szoboszlai has done at Liverpool. And maybe a kind of role that Saka has... We've just been talking about Declan Rice.
Yeah.
He would like a run like that through these half spaces more. For me, Kudus is, certainly for the North London derby, it's going to be their main threat. Can they work the ball to their right-hand side and build up? Can they, especially if there's going to be a new left centre-back in town for Arsenal, can they get Calafiori? One of the big things about Calafiori is his timing and the jumps that he makes onto the left-back. Can he get his angles right? And he's made better steps in that this season. But Kudus on paper is probably...
trickiest.
And it's probably one of the most difficult, if you're talking Calafiori specifically, one of the most difficult matchups for him. Kudus feels like they're out against us.
No, brilliantly explained. And that's going to be all we cover on sort of the player roles segment on FM 26. And don't forget, the game is now available and out for purchase. I've been playing a lot of it, and I owe some apologies to Ruben Amorim because I'm suffering at the moment. But yeah, thank you very much for watching the FM segment. Now we're going to move on into the rest of the Spurs analysis. Thank you. Okay, now moving on into the Spurs portion of the tactical preview. Now, without obviously, going completely over this, I want to mention this. Spurs have got a ridiculous amount of injuries, and any criticisms against Frank, we should always take into account the players that are missing. So Archie Gray, Dejan Kulusevski, Dominic Solanke, James Maddison, Lucas Bergvall, Kudus is carrying a knock but should be back, Brando Kolo-Muani, Basuma. There's a lot of key players missing for Spurs, and I think Maddison, especially, you said this to me off camera, has been massive in terms of when they're in build-up, they're looking for someone to carry the build-up load, and it felt like Maddison did a lot of that under Postecoglou, and his absence has been massive for Spurs so far this season. But I want to show you, I've got every single result that Thomas Frank has had against Mikel Arteta, and he's not won against Mikel Arteta's Arsenal since the first game he actually played against their team. Arteta's took 5 of the 8 games played. So we are going to be looking for the fine margins where Spurs can win this game, and I think I potentially might have found one that I've sold myself on. So this season, Arsenal have only faced 34 corner kicks in the Premier League. But from them 34 corner kicks, they've conceded 14 shots. Now, keep in mind that Arsenal concede the least corners per 90 out of any team in the Premier League. But what do Spurs do really well? They're a good set-piece team, and they've actually scored the most goals by headers in the Premier League this season. So it's going to sound crazy because of the praise that Arsenal have been given for the set-pieces, but I want to really get into why. I think I really want to get into why I'm so keen on Spurs potentially being one of the better set-piece teams in this game. So I want to show you on your screen at the moment, we've got Tottenham set up against Everton away at the Hill Dickinson Stadium, which I'm not going to get used to saying that, but I want to show you the cluster that Spurs have formed on the back post of Everton, and obviously this is for Mickey van de Ven's goal. Now, I've actually got another screenshot to throw up on your screen now, which is Arsenal's last game that they played against Frank's Brentford team, which I think was on the match game day like 34. It was towards the end of last season. But they scored from a second ball off a corner where they had a +1 at the back post. Now, one thing that Thomas Frank's been doing quite a lot at Spurs is overloading the back post and then running across the forward runs. It's really hard to illustrate on the board, hence why I'm using sort of the counters, but I'm using the screenshots. But if we can imagine that they've got a cluster of 4 at the back post, we often see this a lot of times with teams at the moment where they drag and they hit markers and they pin markers across, and what that means is they leave one player against Arsenal, one player, where they can win the aerial. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's probably one of the best chances Spurs have got at winning this game in a very fine margin game. Now, I actually want to show you that I've picked out a few examples of what I mean when I think Arsenal have been a little bit worse on defending set pieces. So if we can remember the Dan Ballard goal that Sunderland scored, it came from a dead goalkeeper, not a dead goalkeeper kick, but a free kick that was taken around the midpoint of the pitch, which was launched really long, and they competed for the second balls. Another few examples of this is Burnley had a massive chance in the 72nd minute, which I think they got put over the crossbar, but it was won off a corner, back post. Another one, Leeds' chance 19 minutes in at 0-0 at the Emirates. I think it was Joe Rodon who headed it directly at David Raya, and he probably should have done better with it. So this isn't something that I've made up. This is a genuine concern for me when talking about Arsenal and Spurs. And I think because Spurs have got all of their big set-piece hitters available and Arsenal, they've lost one of them in terms of Gabriel. I think set-pieces are one to watch out for Spurs. I'm not just going to talk about the set-pieces. I'm obviously going to throw this onto Harvey as well. But I want to use this Manchester City game as a very good example as to what Tottenham Hotspur have been doing in the bigger games against the bigger opposition. So if I just move the counters on to show you, this isn't like for like, but this is almost what Manchester City were doing against Tottenham Hotspur. So what City were actually doing is leaving a +1 at the back. Now, I don't think Mikel Arteta will take this risk. They were leaving a +1 at the back to manage Pape Matar Sarr's sort of runs in between here. Now, Spurs, as we've covered on the channel, have struggled a lot in build-up, and mainly due to their angles throughout their defence. So I mentioned the Bournemouth game numerous amount of times where they locked off the right-hand side, forced the ball into Jed Spence and had a wall pass open to Brennan Johnson, which meant Jed Spence had nowhere to go. If he looks in field, you can see the red counters pinning off that side. Very hard to get through. Now, luckily, for Spurs in this game, they can use the same game plan as what they used against Manchester City, which seems really, you said the word streamlined before, which is a really good word to sort of use for this. But they built in a 4-2 very deep, and they want to work it out sort of Pedro Porro, especially, who can launch these longer balls. And they're attracting the pressure. Now, this is something that Thomas Frank's Brentford did a lot under him. When they built up, I think last season, Brentford had the most touches out of any team in their own penalty box. And it's to play these really short passes to work the opposition on. Now, if I'm looking at Spurs going into this game against Arsenal, and I'm looking at where Arsenal got the weaknesses, potentially having to chop and change the left side of their defence, it actually points directly at what they did against Manchester City, which was Pape Matar Sarr standing on the left side of Manchester City, Richarlison pushing over, Kudus was in there as well. And what you create is almost this 3v3 cluster of second balls. Now, Pape Matar Sarr, for me, is one of the best players I've seen for Spurs this season outside of Kudus because of how good he is at winning them second balls and running into space. On the opposite side of this, we actually had Brennan Johnson, who were making these outside to inside runs, diagonally cutting through City like this. I don't think this is the game for Thomas Frank to take many risks in build-up. And while it will look wasteful, I think if I'm looking at Thomas Frank, who's a very adaptable manager, and he looks at the opposition's weaknesses and he tries to get in there, I'm thinking if there is someone like a Mosquera, like a Calafiori, a Hincapié, who aren't familiar yet with that dominator, aerial, monster that Gabriel is, if they're not familiar with that role, could there be a moment where they're second guessing, maybe Saliba actually is the one to push out, who's not as dominant in the air as Gabriel? And I just think that is where Spurs will look to get a little bit of joy. Now, obviously, Brennan Johnson played in the Manchester City game. I think Audebert has actually been very good for Spurs when he has played this season. The game at Leeds sticks out like a sore thumb. Champions League 2. I think he's a very, very good swivelly player, but I would not be surprised if it was a Brennan Johnson, someone who is more goal hungry, because when I was looking at the front four, front three for Spurs on paper, the main thing that stuck out to me was a lack of pace that they've got available. Obviously, they've got Kudus, but they're now missing Kolo Muani, who I thought was really, really good in that Copenhagen game at crashing and arriving and stretching. And I think them long legs would have really posed a big question of these Arsenal defenders to drop off, to stay, to go, to close in on Sarr, to go completely man-to-man across the back. I think that'll be a big miss. One thing I think they'll say in response to that is Richarlison and Pape Matar can create that Manchester City 2.0 game plan. And what do you think about sort of what Spurs are doing in build-up, the Manchester City game? This is an issue, which I'm sure you'll speak about. But yeah, what do you make of the points that I've outlined for Spurs?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the caveat is injuries. The list and the amount of creativity that they're missing is one thing. And it's probably, I doubt he will do this, but I think we should cover this just in case Frank does throw a curveball. There is the option of going Destiny Udogie and an inside forward, like a Johnson or an Audebert.
Maybe coming in as well.
Or Xavi Simons.
Yeah.
There is the option of a curveball, and then all of a sudden, our natural pressing angles anyway tilt this way, forcing them to their left-hand side, starving them of this right-hand side where they're so dangerous. Also, Romero being back for them in the last week or so. Yeah. He's brilliant at the balls that they want in these channels. Richarlison's a great scrapper at the very least. But there is potential for a curveball here. I would say Mosquera, Hincapié and Calafiori are all aggressor types. Yeah. They all, on paper, complement Saliba well. But it's not, when we're talking about thrusting them into a North London derby, and where, certainly, we were speaking off camera for a Hincapié, if he were to play, I don't think he's poor in the air, but he's very good in the air for a left back, not as much for a centre back. And I think you need to partner him with a more aerially dominant partner like a Calafiori if he was to play. I think it will be Mosquera. Mm-hmm. So I think there is scope for this Spurs to cause us real damage. And their game plan has to be to frustrate and to pick their moments on the counter-attack. And I think from an Arsenal perspective, the game plan has to be, and probably we would have been okay in times gone by to saying, oh great, we've got all this final third possession, we've got Spurs locked in, and we've set our shape, we've got our counter-attacking net, that's nice, that's great. I think, like I said at the beginning, we have to do a bit more of what we've done this season in away games. We have to do that at home this year, holding the ball and trying to encourage them out a little bit more. Yeah. Maybe that's through, I won't move everyone around, but maybe that's through Marino dropping, getting one of Van de Ven and Romero to follow, getting one of the fullbacks to arrive through the space, just baiting these jumps a bit more to get Spurs a little bit further away from goal. You have because we have a lot more security and ability to do that in the middle third this season. So it's almost playing a game that you wouldn't normally want us to play in a North London derby, but that could be the way for me against a Frank Spurs.
Arsenal are massive favourites for this game. Obviously, we ran through the Big Six record. The North London derby record is well in favour of Arsenal, especially at the Emirates under Arteta. And Tottenham have played the second most crosses in the Premier League this season, which when we covered Arsenal on the channel to explain why they're the most complete team in Europe now because it can do so much, it does feel like, if you're a Spurs fan watching this, don't be disgruntled if Spurs do start to go long and you wonder why we're going long against Arsenal. They're a big, heavy team. Yeah. At the moment, their biggest strengths to me against this Arsenal team are them second ball knockdowns that we've seen against Manchester City, are the 4-4-2 deep block. I don't want to see this Spurs team trying to build out with that two in midfield against Arsenal. I don't think that's where the joy will come. And whilst a lot of people like to see their teams go to ground and be brave, you stand a far better chance of playing on them second ball knockdowns, getting Sarr high, getting Kudus to attack space, getting either Johnson, Audebert, Simons to maybe add one in the centre, get your doggy potentially breaking forward. If it's Spence, can we get Spence inside? I'd look for a little bit more verticality in the game. I'd look for way more sort of directness and the players to be very fresh, on it, attacking space, looking to play Hollywood balls. I'd be looking for that because, as you said there, Arsenal do sometimes give the ball away in certain moments. And if it is going to be Sarr, Palhinha, Bentancur, they're probably not the match up against Rice and Zubimendi and Eze in terms of second balls. But they're a very good second ball trio in there. So don't be surprised if we see all that. And yeah, I just really wanted to highlight as well how tight the games have been between Arsenal and Brentford since Thomas Frank has been there. So Brentford haven't actually struggled to score against Arsenal under Frank. Last season, there was a 1-1 at the Emirates, it was 3-1 at the G-Tech, and the season before, 2-1 Arsenal, 1-0 Arsenal. Season before, 1-1, 3-0 Arsenal. Very, very tight games apart from maybe 1 or 2, which for a Brentford punching up to an Arsenal team that has always been challenging for the league titles in them seasons, it's a very, very decent, respectable performance in terms of results from a Thomas Frank Spurs.
And Spurs beat us in pre-season as well.
Oh yeah, you can't forget the pre-season. And yeah, I would just look at them games, and I went and looked at all the goals that Brentford scored against Arsenal in them games, and it was sort of marginalised set pieces, someone hanging on the back post, second phase set pieces, so when the ball comes back out from a corner, they still like to leave men high. They isolated Saliba at the back post on 2 occasions for 2 goals, won the knockdown across, I think, for Visser's goal, and I think for even Tony's goal. So this is going to be a very, very interesting battle, and I think Spurs fans, why not just go into it a little bit like bit of chest out, because you've come out of the international break, probably more encouraged than when you went into it. So whilst I do think Arsenal are favourites, I think Spurs it's one of them games for a new manager in it. Like, if you get a big win in a derby, or if you get a big draw in a derby, it's massive for your momentum, and it buys you so much more. And I think we've already seen the big game plan from Frank already against PSG, City this season. So yeah, and obviously it's away, and Spurs don't like to play at home. So they stand a better chance playing away than they do at home. So yeah, if you had a prediction for a score line just before we wrap up, would you have one?
2-1 Arsenal.
2-1 Arsenal.
But I think there's a very good chance this game is won by a goal, if it is. I mean, it's a big ask going away from home in a North London derby anyway, as it is. We've got a very good record at home against Spurs in terms of not losing. I'd be surprised if they managed to find a way to win it, but I think there's scope for a result for Spurs. I really do think that. I think it's going to be another game where at times, with the lack of bodies that we have, we saw against Sunderland how much chasing a game sapped us with the energy. We were speaking off camera again. Historically, the first goal in the North London derby hasn't actually been that meaning. I think the landscape might change slightly for this one.
Feels like a tight margin game, doesn't it? I think I would just go, just to play the Spurs the beneficiary, I'd probably say 1-1. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I've got a good feeling. I really do like Pape Matar Sarr, and I've just got a really good feeling about this game. I don't know what it is, but I think sort of left-sided, problems that are going there. If they play to his second ball strengths like we've seen at City, I think there could be a really good point there. And one thing we've not touched on is Spurs pressing goalkeeper kicks, which they did at the Etihad as well. And he's a very good sort of jump out of possession. So I'll go 1-1, Sarr and Marino to score. There you go. Thank you very, very much for watching this episode of The Overlap Breakdown. And if you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our channel. And please do not forget to check out Harvey's YouTube channel in the top of the description below. And we'll see you next time for more analysis. Thank you.